Hello, I'm Barrett from the C4 Cyber Club at Cypress College. In this video presentation today, I'm going to give an overview of essentially social engineering and specifically using the social engineering toolkit. We'll be looking at specifically spear phishing and a phishing attempt that targets a user through their email and attempts to steal credentials or possibly gain backdoor access to their system. Uh, so, what is the social engineering toolkit? It's a free cybersecurity tool used by security researchers and penetration testers. Unfortunately, it is also used by malicious criminals as well. It's kind of the double-edged sword of security. We have all these tools available to run tests, do vulnerability scans, find issues, but then that those tools are also available to criminals as well. So we'll see how, basically, we'll see how it's done from the attacker side and how they craft these social engineering campaigns. Now, other than just cloning websites and phishing for emails, they could also this tool can be used to fake phone numbers, sending SMS, um, and as I just mentioned, cloning websites is one of the big use cases of the social engineering toolkit. So when a social engineering attack is performed, the weakest link in the chain is not the computer system or the firewall or services or apps, but it's the humans behind those technologies. So it's not hacking computers, but it's hacking humans and the human element. So just a little bit more detail on what is spear phishing. Say a criminal, malicious attacker, he's targeting a specific company and he sees a certain employee that works there and they start to follow them on social media. Either they look at their LinkedIn, their Facebook accounts or Twitter accounts, and they start to get a picture of who they communicate with a lot, who are some of their friends. So maybe they realize, oh, they have a best friend named John. So I'm going to fake John's email address and I'm going to create this personalized email. And let's say maybe it's an email that says, "Hey, I'm working on this work project, and I just need you to click this link, and it'll ask you to log into your Gmail account, but you just need to do that so you can contribute." You know, so they open this email and they say, "Oh, I know John. You know, he's a good friend of mine. I trust him completely." So you go to that site, or in a lot of cases, you click on a PDF link or a document file, and that is what is actually holding um, malicious software or potentially a cloned website that is going to harvest those credentials. So that's what we're going to look at today in a hands-on lab. And I'm not going to go super technical. This video is mainly geared towards the average internet user, but I think it'll definitely be eye-opening to see what happens in the background from an attacker's point of view. But also a reminder that these tools are used by security professionals, and in a good case scenario would be to test your own company's, your own employees' stance against phishing attacks like this. So you could essentially phish your own company as a security awareness training in itself. And then anybody who fails, they get a little extra meetings. So, okay, so we will go ahead and launch the social engineering toolkit, and this is working within Linux, and particularly a distribution called Kali Linux. It's one of the most widely used Linux distributions for security testing. So right away, when you launch this, you receive all this information, and specifically it says the social engineering toolkit is designed purely for good and not evil, which is great. But As I mentioned before, we know that this isn't only being used by good people. So, but we're going to hit yes because we are using this for good reasons. So once we get here, we have a menu of all kinds of different options. Today, we're going to look at social engineering attacks. We're going to look at website attack vectors. The very first thing we're going to do is clone a Gmail login. And here we're going to do credential harvester attack method. So it says up here, the credential harvester method will utilize web cloning of a website that has a username and password field and harvest all the information on that website. So we'll go ahead and that. We're just going to go ahead and choose a web template. Okay, and this is where I don't want to get too technical here, but we're essentially going to be posting back the information that is sent to the IP address of this machine that we're on right now. Oops. Moment, let me grab that. So 192.168.9.2, and this is essentially the IP address of this Alley machine that I am running on right now. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and select Google. Simple as that. We'll choose this template, and you see it's cloning the website. So have to launch the web server. So we're essentially launching a web server on our machine here, and you'll see that all files have been copied. So it cloned the login page, and it put it in our web server location on our Kali machine here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that location. I just have to do a real quick edit. Okay, if I look at the files, this index HTML is essentially the very basic cloned login page. And I just have to edit this post.php in order to tell it, don't send it back to google.com. We want to send back the credential information to our machine, which is located here. Let's save this. Okay, very good. In this file that's been created here, this harvester, anything that we gather through this method is going to be inputted into this file. So we will come back to that in a moment. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come to another machine here, and this is another instance of Linux. This could be your Windows machine. Essentially, just think of this as the victim's machine, and this is the person who received the phishing email. So we will visit the IP address, or essentially the web server that we just set up that clone site on. Now, while that's loading, it's going to take a minute or two. Something to note, when you receive a phishing email, they're usually quite detailed, and you're not going to see them linked to this IP address. What will normally happen is the attacker will register their own domain name, and they'll use what's called typo squatting, and they might register something like qmail.com or Gmail, but with a 1 at the end. So they'll try and make it look like Gmail, or maybe Google with 3 O's, google.com, something that might trick somebody into actually clicking on it. Because if you see this in an email, most people are probably going to think that's a little fishy. No pun intended. Give it just another second, it should load up. And another method too, you actually can get away with not registering an account. Some emails, you could see somebody type gmail.com, but the actual link that it goes to is this IP. So that's why it's important. You'll often hear to hover over a link, and then it will show you where it's actually going to, which, yeah, if you see a link going to just a standard IP address like this, it's usually bad news. Okay, great. So the login here, you could see, it looks like a Gmail login. It's kind of missing the logo here, so there could be some improvements done to this template, but for this purpose, it'll work. So let's say, okay, my email is user@gmail.com. Let's say I'm super proud. I have a really secure and complex password. So I'm going to enter that in. It uses, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and all these different characters, and it's really long. Let's see, that might be like 15 some characters. Okay, that's weird. Gmail just crashed. So if I was a normal user, I'd maybe say, oh, that's weird. Okay, well, let me just reload it, and let me just go back to gmail.com. Then you log in, everything would be fine. But what you don't know is that on the attacker's machine, we can now look at this harvester file, and we see we were able to capture those credentials. And remember when I was saying, oh, I'm entering a super secure password. While this password would be very hard to do any kind of like brute force attacking, when it comes to just credential harvesting, and this is where the human element comes into play, because if you don't catch that phishing attempt and you click on that link, it doesn't matter how complex your password is. And another good point too, this is why it's important to use different passwords for different accounts. Because if somebody gets that one really strong complex password that you use for everything, then they have access to all of your different accounts. And you can be sure that they, especially if they have access to your Gmail or your general email account, they can find every details on any service that you use. So that concludes the first social engineering attack. I'm going to come over to another machine here. I have the social engineering toolkit loaded up, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to do credential harvesting, but we're going to do something that attacks the browser through extension, or like it will display that there's an outdated plugin that you have to allow. So we will do social engineering attacks again, do website attack vectors, and we'll do this Metasploit browser exploit method. And we'll do web templates again. Okay, and very similarly, we have to set the IP address of the machine that we're using, and that's where it's going to send back information. And I'm going to select Java required. So we're going to choose these are all different kinds of exploits. In this, you might wonder, well, how do you know which to choose? It would depend on doing a lot of information gathering, a lot of research on the system that you're attempting to attack, figuring out what they're vulnerable for. So I particularly know that the machine that I'm going to load this on is vulnerable to this Java 7 applet remote code execution. So I'm going to select that one. And here we're selecting what's called a payload. So when the exploit is successful, the payload will then execute. So we're going to choose this first one, the Windows Shell Reverse TCP. And that's what's going to let the victim machine communicate back to our attacking machine. And that's how we'll be able to then gain further access. I'm going to let this load for a second. Okay, great. So that's, you'll see that the server has started. So we're essentially waiting for someone to connect here. So I'm going to go over to this other machine. It's another Linux machine. Once again, this just consider this the victim machine. This could be your Windows machine at home, your Mac machine. The OS doesn't necessarily matter. So similarly, as we did before, I'm going to just go ahead and visit that site. And this IP address once again, this would normally be masked and maybe a more clever address. But you'll see here, Firefox has prevented the outdated plugin Java from running. Continue blocking, or do we want to allow? Well, let's say our good friend John sent this link and we say, it must be something he needs to work on and he hasn't updated this yet. So I'm going to go ahead and allow this. Say, yeah, I'll just allow for now. And then, okay, well, nothing's happening. So maybe you email back to John. You say, hey, I don't know, I went to your site, nothing happened. But what has really happened is we see here right away, started reverse handler, and the remote code execution has occurred, and interpreter session 1 opened. So at this point, we have access. We could say sessions. Okay, we have a username of this machine is student. It's on the Ubuntu machine, we see here. And we could essentially log into this session and get a lot more information. Okay, so we're interacting with session 1 here. Let's go ahead and get Sysinfo. Okay, so we now definitely know for sure it's an Ubuntu machine running Linux. Let's get UID. Okay, username is student. We could take a look at all of their running processes by typing PS. Okay, so this is that they're running a lot of different things. I'm sure somewhere in here you'd probably see Firefox, any kind of applications they're running. We could take a look at that. Probably the most scary for most people, we could take a screenshot. You'll see that screenshot was saved to our folder here on the attacker machine. And we could even open a shell, which gives us much more access to their system and all of their files and directories. So if I do look at their present working directory, we are in the student home folder. And just to show you how I am literally on their machine, let's say echo, don't worry about the tech terms here, but hello, I am in your machine. I'm going to put that into a file called hello.txt. If I do ls, I see, listing the files here, I see a hello.txt was created. Then if I come back to the Ubuntu machine, here we go. And so we're in the home folder here, and here we go, hello.txt. Open that up. Hello, I am in your machine. So that's pretty much it. Definitely two very common types of phishing attacks. And this wasn't even related to opening a file. I think most people consider phishing attempts, as long as I don't double click and open something, I'll be okay. But as you've seen, you really have to be careful about what websites you visit. Make sure they're legitimate, and be careful submitting any type of credentials on a file, or on a website. So this concludes this social engineering video, and thanks a lot for watching.